Hey, what's up guys? It's the new sensation, Big O Notation here. And I don't normally do these types of videos, but I was too excited when I saw these new Syn Xeno cards, so I'm actually going to be reviewing some of the new spoilers for set 15. I don't think I've ever really reviewed any spoilers or gone over my thoughts on some of the newer cards being revealed, but it's Syn Xeno, man. I definitely can't turn down this opportunity to go over my initial thoughts, because I have quite a few different thoughts about the new cards. We got a lot of cards in this drop, so I am very excited. For those of you who are just here for a list, I will flash it up on the screen for a little bit in a minute. But so this is the list I have currently going on. I don't know why there's two copies of it. Just focus on the bottom half of the screen. I'll be going over my reasoning behind this list later in the video, but I want to make it very clear that this is just a TheoryCraft. Like, I have not tested this deck at all yet. This is just my initial build going into testing, so coming out of testing it could look completely different, and I'm sure once the next set drops, I will be bringing you guys an in-person deck profile of my finished list, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. But for now, this is my initial list. I will go over my reasoning behind it later on, as I mentioned, but for now I'm just going to go over the individual cards that we got and talk about my initial thoughts on them before we get into proper deck building stuff. So, getting straight on into the actual cards, the first one we have is an Omega Shenron SR. He has the same auto as all of the other Shadow Dragons that we've already seen, where when he's played or discarded, he checks the top card for a Shadow Dragon, and if it's a black Shadow Dragon, you get it to your hand. So, and they've managed to keep that going throughout all of the new battle cards that they've revealed as well, which is really nice. But this guy is just unique, triple strike, 30k, and you can play him for 2 energy if you warp 7 black Shadow Dragons from your drop area, and if you have 3 or more energy. So this card is obviously very, very reminiscent of the tournament promo Omega Shenron that was for the yellow Syn Xeno deck, but obviously it costs 1 more energy to play down, and when you play it, you're still theoretically drawing a card if you get a Shadow Dragon off of his auto. So it's basically the same as the yellow Omega Shenron, but you play it for 1 more energy, which makes sense because the yellow one was kind of busted, and the fact that you could play it for 1 energy, draw a card, and get a massive triple striker on the board on turn 3 was pretty insane. And then if you combined it with cards like Belmod or Syn Xeno to sack them off and get around the unique tag, it just got even more crazy. So the fact that this costs 2 energy kind of makes sense. They're trying to make a more balanced version of the yellow Syn Xeno stuff, I guess. My initial thoughts on this card is that it's actually really amazing for the deck. Like, one of the things that the deck struggled with was because it was primarily a mill deck, but it didn't initially mill enough for it to be like a strong competitive mill deck. It kind of relied on the opponent either drawing a bunch of cards from their own cards, or just them taking the Oceanus challenge and swinging when you've used an Oceanus negate a bunch of times. That was kind of the only way that you would consistently mill people out, or unless you were just against a really slow deck, which obviously against a control deck, a mill deck is generally going to prevail. But the fact that this card now exists is going to give the deck that extra reach and be able to take it into potentially being able to win through normal means in some of the longer games. So now when you take your opponent down to 3 life with some of your crit swings with your 3 drops that you're playing off your 1 drop haze, you're actually going to be like, that pressure is going to actually mean something. A lot of the time what would happen with the deck was you would be swinging with your 3 drop hazes and doing a bunch of crit damage to them, but it wouldn't ever amount to anything because you'd never take them low enough in life total for it to be a threat, because your opponent could still go down to 2 or 1 life without being worried, because you only had 1 double striker in the deck, which was your 3 drops in Shenron, and the 3 drop Naturon Shenron could maybe take some keyword skills and try and get a sneaky victory in now and again, but most of the time you couldn't kill people through normal means. But the fact that this card now exists, it's a 2 energy 30k triple striker from turn 3 onwards. It just makes it so much easier, and the fact that this is turn 3 onwards is really not much of a hindrance for this deck, because right now the meta is obviously really slow with a bunch of blue decks running around, so turn 3 is kind of considered early game at this point, for this meta at least, whereas the last format it would have probably been considered more late game because of all of the turn 2 kill stuff that was running about. But yeah, so the three energy requirement is really not that bad right at the moment, and even in a more aggressive meta it won't be so bad because the deck is looking to go into the long game, so you're going to kind of, if you're not making it to turn 3, you're going to be dying anyway whether this card comes down or not. So just the existence of this card is really good. It gives the deck that extra reach in being able to be played as an actual deck rather than just primarily a mill deck. So we have another Omega Shenron. He's got the same skill of all of the Shadow Dragons. He's unique 30k and he has an activate main for 1 black. If your leader is a Shadow Dragon card, you kill one of your Shadow Dragons that cost 5 or less in your battle area, and then you play him from your hand, and if you do, you get to warp one of your opponent's battle cards. So that is going to be really nice for a couple of reasons. First of all, well, the main reason that it's going to be really strong is because you're going to be able to you're going to have some more consistent removal. Something that the deck really struggled with before was having consistent hard removal in the early game, because the main way that it was able to remove battle cards was with the Ultimate Dragon Tackle, or with the Ultimate Dragon Quake, and the Ultimate Dragon Tackle relied on your opponent having a unison down, and it relied on them choosing for you to let them remove, or for them to let you remove a battle card on their board, rather than just choosing the remove 2 markers from their unison option. And the Ultimate Dragon Quake was not hard removal unless they had 15 or fewer cards left in their deck, and it also only hit cards that cost greater than the opponent's energy. And finally, the Ultimate Dark Dragon Slaying Bullet again gave your opponent the choice of which card they wanted to remove when you used the activate main / battle skill. So that was a really big issue for the deck, was having early game hard removal, especially for smaller battle cards if you're against more aggressive decks, which is where your harder matchups are actually going to be. So you want more cards to deal with that matchup. The deck kind of crumbled against that style of deck, and this card is going to be really helpful in dealing with that. The only problem that I see with this card is not having enough Shadow Dragons on the board that you're willing to sack off, because in the older Syn Xeno deck, the yellow one, obviously this card is very comparable to the SR Omega Shenron that was printed for the yellow deck, because it's got pretty much the same skills except for the fact that you can't copy skills off of your drop area stuff. But the advantage of the yellow deck that it had was it would swing with its critical raid Shenrons, and then it would sack off into a bigger Omega Shenron. Like, it had cards that you kind of wanted to get rid of because they had already attacked and they were already in rest mode and they weren't doing anything, even if they restood, because they didn't have the blocker tag. Whereas with this deck, a lot of your cards have blocker, and they'll be restanding at the end of the turn. So even if you swing with them, you'll get them back so they're useful during your opponent's turn. And you want your blockers live in this deck because you're a mill deck, so your main objective is just to survive. This guy can't gain blocker in any way. He doesn't have the blocker tag. He doesn't offer you any defenses. He's just a 30k body that removes a card. So he's really not bad by any means, but the only issue I see with him is even your 1-drop haze that you have on the board, even if he's in rest mode, you kind of want to keep him alive, because if he stays alive a turn and you're able to like block with your leader when your opponent swings into him and block with some of your battle cards to keep him alive, if you can keep him alive, it's really advantageous for the deck, because it means you can then free play more stuff during your turn, or play it for much cheaper with the 1-drop hazer skill. So the main target for this guy would probably be your 5-drop Oceanus, but that relies on your opponent building up a massive board that makes you want to use the Oceanus into. And so it can maybe feel a little bit clunky in that regard, but it's definitely a good card, and I definitely recommend running it. I'm not saying don't run it. I'm just saying that in these situations it could be kind of clunky. And the fact that it has unique is also a little bit annoying, because it means you're going to have to be very, very wary of the fact that you've played one now and it's going to stick around for a while, so you won't have very good hard removal for a little while. Going on to the next card, and this is a card that I was really hoping would get printed, just for the simple fact that it has Barrier Blocker. So this is our 3-drop Ice Shenron Negative Energy Explosion, 15k. I was really hoping that this deck got a Barrier Blocker in some sort of respect, and it did, which makes me super happy. And not only did it get a Barrier Blocker, but it has an auto where at the end of the turn you can switch it to active mode, similar to the 3-drop Haze. So you can actually swing it into your opponent's battle cards or swing into your opponent's leader, and then you'll still keep your blocker around. And the reason that I was so hopeful for this card existing was because a massive problem for this deck was playing against green in general. Obviously, hand control is a abhorrent matchup for the deck, and it's almost impossible to win that matchup because the deck doesn't inherently plus all that much. It just goes even. But another issue was just against green in general, because the deck has absolutely no ability to play around freezer counterplay, because your main play on your turn is just going to be 1-drop Haze into 3-drop into attack, or keep it alive for a blocker skill, and then pass. That's going to be most of the battle cards that you're playing on your turn that can be hit with freezer counterplay. Obviously with those new 8-drops they'll be not hit by freezer counterplay, but specifically for the 1-drop into 3-drop, you were just super vulnerable to freezer, and they wouldn't ever freezer your 1-drop because it's only a 1 energy investment. But as soon as you've rested the 1-drop and you've brought out the 3-drop, you've just spent 2 energy, your opponent's going to freezer counterplay it, and then you kind of don't really have a play for the rest of the turn because your 1-drop's in rest mode, and unless you have another 1-drop into 3-drop in your hand with 2 more energy up, it's really impossible to play the game. But the existence of a barrier blocker in the deck is so incredible, because it means now against green you actually have plays, and they're either going to have to freezer counterplay your 1-drop, which just feels bad for them, or they're going to have to hope that you don't have the barrier blocker in hand. And this card is really amazing, and I'm really glad that it exists now, because it's going to make green matchups a lot more tolerable. And for the second Ice Shenron that we have, he is very reminiscent of another of the old Syn Xeno stuff, which is he has an auto burst 1. If your leader's a Shadow Dragon card and it's your opponent's turn, when this card is using a combo from your hand, you switch a Shadow Dragon from your battle area into active mode. So it's very similar to the Oceanus Shenron Swift Spirals, the 2-drop that had dual attack. Basically with this card, it's similar to the Oceanus that was printed for yellow Syn Xeno. You're never really going to be playing it unless you really need to, but you're just going to be using it to combo from hand and get some blockers back. The only disadvantages for this deck versus the yellow version with the Oceanus is that your blockers in this deck are nowhere near as big as they would be in the yellow deck, because your Omega Shenron doesn't copy the blocker skill from your drop area, so you're not going to be able to consistently gain big barrier blockers on the board, which means that some of your battle cards, when they block the first time, they might just die on that swing, because your opponent might swing with some big battle cards that you want to be blocking, and then you're going to be taking a 30k swing into a 15k battle card, and it might just die because you don't want to combo out of it. So that's the only main issue that I can see with this card compared to the yellow version. But it's still definitely a great card, and I'm definitely going to be testing it out. I think that it's probably going to be worth running just to help you survive the early game. This is like, it's a really amazing card for the early game, just for the simple fact that it's going to be a 0 energy way to stop another attack potentially. So that's just something to note. And if you're combining it with the barrier blocker that we just went over, then it's going to make it a lot stronger of a combination, because the barrier blocker can't be removed by skills. So obviously it's a little bit better. So for the next card and the next SR that we have our first Nueva Shenron, Power of Darkness, and he's obviously got the same auto. He's also got critical, which is nice, so if you feel like you need to play him, you just want a 20k crit that potentially draws a card, you can play him off your 1-drop haze, which is great. He also has an activate main, limit 1, burst 1, send this card from your hand to the warp, and then you look at the top 5 cards of your deck to add a Black Shadow Dragon battle card with an energy cost of 5 or less among them to your hand. So he's just really nice for digging through your deck. He's very reminiscent of the Oceanus Shenron from the yellow Syn Xeno deck. As you can see, a lot of these skills are just being transferred over into the black deck, which is pretty nice. The fact that it sends from hand to warp is kind of annoying because it means you can't load up your drop area to 7 dragons as fast. And so obviously you're going to be awakening a bit later, you're going to be bringing out your triple striker a bit later. So that's a little bit annoying, but the reasoning for that is because if it had just discarded itself from your hand, it would have triggered your its own auto from the discard effect, because it got discarded by a Shadow Dragon skill, so it would have basically been a +1, which would have been really busted. But the burst one is nice because you can fill up your drop area with some of your dragons to get to 7 dragons easier. And just being able to search cards is really great, obviously. And the approach that I think is best to take with this deck so far is because you're going to be deck thinning so much with your Shadow Dragon autos to check the top card, and with cards like this card, and with your extra cards that search cards. The best way to play this deck will probably just be running a toolbox of all of the different Shadow Dragons, most of them being the 3 drops that you can play off of Haze Shenron. And that will just help you dig for the ones that are specifically good for the matchup you're against. So for example, against green, if I'm running 2 of the barrier blocker ice Shenron, I could still be digging for them really hard throughout my deck, because I'm just going to be discarding a bunch of Shadow Dragons, checking the top card, grabbing them to my hand, and then using cards like this to search the top 5 for the specific card that I want for that matchup. So this card is just great to have. Obviously every deck wants a searcher, and this deck got it, which I'm again really happy about. And going on to the other Nueva Shenron, we have another critical Nueva. He's 16k. He's got the same auto as all of the dragons again, but he also has an auto of, if your leader is a Black Shadow Dragon card, when this card is played, play up to 1 Toa Resonance of Shadow from your drop area with a marker on it. So this is obviously incredibly nice to have. Again, just adding to that toolbox of different 3 drops you can play off of your 1-drop Haze Shenron. And that is going to be really helpful because it means you can recycle your Unison a lot easier. And it's cards like this that make me consider running a smaller number of Unisons in the deck, because you already have the 1-drop extra card that can search the top 7 for your Unison. And now you have the recyclability in this card, so you're never really going to run out of Unisons if you're running copies of both this card and the extra card that searches the Unison. You could potentially get away with running 3 copies of the Unison, even though it's a Spirit Boost deck that kind of relies on having the Unison down. It's very safe to actually potentially run 3 copies of the Unison if you're running a 50 card deck, I would argue. I could definitely see this style of deck going up to more like 55, maybe even 60 cards if you really wanted to, because there's such a wide toolbox of different cards you can run now. But as for me, I prefer to have all of my decks at 50 cards just for maximum consistency. And so in a 50 card deck, you could maybe consider cutting the Unison down to 3 copies. For now, I think I have it at 4 still, but that's just to test it out, because I want to have maximum consistency and chances to see my Unison turn 1. But you could definitely test out running 3 copies, because now you can recycle it with this guy. But I just want to bring up the fact that if you are recycling the Unison with this guy, that's going to be a 1-drop Haze effect burnt for the turn, because you're probably not going to want to pay 3 energy just to drop this guy. So you're going to be bringing it out with the 1-drop Haze, and you need to bear in mind that unless you have multiple 1-drop Hazes, that's pretty much going to be your play for the turn. So that's very important to note, that if you are dropping this guy, you're probably not doing much else this turn. So, going on to the Raid Shenrons, the first one is very interesting. He's a 3-drop 14k blocker. He also has a counter attack, negate the attack and play this card in rest mode. That's obviously quite annoying for the deck, because it means you can't stop 2 attacks with 1 card. He also has a permanent, if you have 7 or more Black Shadow Dragons in your drop area, reduce the cost of this card in your hand by 2. And then when he's played or discarded, you get the same effect as always. So this card is effectively going to be a 1-drop negate, and if he sticks around, he's going to be a blocker during your next turn. Initial thoughts for this is it's definitely incredibly nice to have, because the deck didn't really have any cheap negates inbuilt into the archetype already. The only proper negate that it had was the 2-drop Oceanus, or the 5-drop Oceanus that becomes a 2-drop. But that guy's pretty expensive. He's 2 energy, and you have to discard a card. Whereas this guy, if you have 7 or more dragons in the drop, he's just going to be a 1-drop. He doesn't require a discard, and he actually pluses you a card, because when you play him down, you still get to check the top card for a dragon. So that's going to be really helpful. And he also has the blocker tag. This could potentially replace Power Burst within the deck, because of the simple fact that it's a Shadow Dragon, so now it's searchable as well, and it just offers you more consistency within the deck. Obviously, Power Burst in itself is going to be a stronger card than this card in a vacuum, but within the actual archetype and within the actual deck, you want to be having as many Shadow Dragons as you can in the deck, so this guy could potentially replace the Power Burst in the deck, and that could be really strong. Just for extra consistency, as I've already mentioned. So, onto the next Rage Shenron. We have a really interesting Rage here. He's a 16k blocker. He's got the same auto as the other Shadow Dragons, as always. He has an auto burst 1 if your leader is a Shadow Dragon card and it's your opponent's turn. When this card is used in a combo from your hand, you switch up to one of your leader cards to active mode. So that's very interesting. It's basically like the, I think it was the Nueva Shenron, that's like the old Oceanus, the yellow one. Except instead of choosing your battle cards, it chooses your leader card. And the fact that it's a 16k blocker is also nice, because it means that you could, in a pinch, bring it out off of your 1-drop haze if you need that extra blocker on the board and you don't have any other options. You could potentially bring this guy out. I really don't think that this card will see much play, to be honest, because a lot of the times you don't need your leader in active mode, because your opponent's going to be swinging at your leader rather than at your battle cards or your unison card. And if they're swinging at your unison card, unless you combo this on the swing that you block with your leader, you're not going to be able to combo it in. So I'm a little confused as to where this comes in handy. I guess the main situation you want to be using this is to protect your 1-drop haze Shenron if you've used the skill that turn, and that's pretty nice. But I think in that situation, I think it was the ice Shenron actually. The ice Shenron is going to be just the same, because you're going to have a 3-drop blocker out that you played off of your 1-drop haze. And he's going to be able to block one attack, and then you can use the Ice Shenron to restand it and block another attack, which does the same thing as this Rage Shenron. So I don't really see where this is going to come up, where this is going to be better than the Ice Shenron, to be honest. I suppose that would give your Unison a few more markers, but your Unison generally has enough markers to last you throughout the game, because it's a little bit tricky for opponents to be swinging into it when you have so many blockers, when your leader is a blocker, and when your Unison is gaining markers when your leader blocks. So I don't really see where this card comes up a huge amount, but it's nice to have still, obviously. I just think that it's probably not going to make the cut in most decks. So, going on to the extra cards, and this is where things get really exciting, because I think some of these cards, especially this one, are completely insane. So this card is a 1-drop counterattack. If your leader is mono black, choose up to one of your opponent's battle cards with 15k power or less, ignoring barrier, and send it to its owner's warp. And then it gains Shadow Dragon in all areas, as do all of the extra cards. If you have a black Unison card in play, you can play it for free. Or you can use the counter skill for free, and then he has an activate main/battle, choose up to one of your black leader cards or battle cards, and it gets plus 15k power until the end of the battle or the end of the turn. This is an SR as well, so I think this deck has 3 SRs, which is going to make it a little bit pricey. But initial thoughts on this card is, it is really insane. The fact that it's not locked to Shadow Dragons in any way just makes this card incredible, because finally Black has got its own sort of free play unison synergy thing, like Dormant Potential or Wolfang Fist or the other cards similar to that. And this card is really good because it's effectively going to be a little bit like a Wolfang Fist in the fact that it can remove a card that has 15k or less power immediately. This card will send it to the warp rather than sending it to the drop, which is a plus for this card, but it will not work against cards that have 15k or more power, which is obviously what makes Wolfang Fist a little bit better than this card in that regard. Is that if your opponent is swinging with a big card and you Wolfang Fist it down and then maybe combine it with some other power negging, you can then kill the card through a couple of different combinations of cards, or you can just use it as a free minus 15k if you need to combo out of the attack, whereas this card only hits cards that have 15k power or less, so it's only going to hit small guys. But in terms of running this in Syn Xeno, I think that this card is really helpful because, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the Omega Shenron, this deck originally, before set 15 came out, was heavily lacking early game hard removal for small guys, and this card just brings that to the table immediately. So it's really, really helpful, and the deck also lacked barrier removal, so this is again going to help you with that. And then also it has the flexibility of having the activate main/battle skill to give your leader card or battle card plus 15k power until the end of the battle or the end of the turn. So it just has some nice flexibility in that, and if you have the energy open, you can then use the activate main/battle skill and effectively, and then your leader will gain 15k power for the end of the battle. So it will effectively count as a Wolfang Fist, because it will do the same thing, but that's only if you have the energy open, because you only get the counter skill for free. But all in all, this card is incredible, and it will probably see play in multiple black decks, not just the Syn Xeno deck. But I think that this card is especially good in Syn Xeno. I'm really excited for this card. For the next extra card, we have Ultimate Ice Ray, and this card is another really good one. It just has an activate main/battle. Your opponent places the top card of their deck in their drop area. Additionally, you may choose 2 black cards in your hand and discard them. If you do, your opponent can only attack with battle cards one more time for the turn. So, basically, Syn Xeno just kind of got its own Flying Nimbus, which is really nice. And the thing is you are discarding 2 black cards from your hand, which is more costly than Flying Nimbus is. Flying Nimbus only requires you to discard 1 card. But in the Syn Xeno deck, again, that is not a problem for you, because if you're discarding your black Shadow Dragon battle cards, they're going to trigger their autos to check the top card, and as long as you hit Shadow Dragons off the top, you're going to be going even with that. So those 2 cards that you're discarding are actually not going to be a cost in the Syn Xeno deck. Theoretically, you could play this card in other decks, but I think in other black decks, this card would be way too costly. Going -3 from hand and tapping out 2 energy just for a Flying Nimbus is way too expensive. But the fact that in the Syn Xeno deck you can play this card for free off of your Spirit Boost skill, and you can replace the 2 cards that you discard, make it really, really good in the Syn Xeno deck, and I am very excited for this card. This card is going to be insanely good. It just acts as a hard floodgate as opposed to the Oceanus negate, which was kind of more of a soft floodgate. And so against those aggressive decks that kind of want to kill you on turn 2 or turn 3 or turn 4 really early on, if they're just swinging through Oceanus negate, you can then drop this guy and be like, no, only swinging with battle cards 1 more time for the turn, as opposed to having to mill 4. So this card just puts a ceiling on those aggro decks that you're going to be playing against as a Syn Xeno player, which is really good for the deck, because as I mentioned earlier, aggro decks are going to be what you're mainly struggling against. Then we have Ultimate Flame Shot, the Nueva Shenron extra card. This card is very interesting. So it's if your leader is a Black Shadow Dragon and you place one card from your life in the drop area, place the top card of your opponent's deck in their drop area, and your leader card doesn't take damage from your opponent's attacks until the end of the battle or the end of the turn, whichever comes first. So effectively, this card is a archetype inbuilt Brainwash No More, which is very funny because Brainwash No More was a card that I was running in earlier builds of my original Syn Xeno list. But this card can be played for free off of Spirit Boost, but if you're not playing it for free, it's going to be 2 energy, which is a little bit more expensive than the Brainwash No More. This card is definitely really good just to have and just to exist for the deck. But to be honest, I think that this card will be more of a side deck card. And in my current theory build that I've got going on, I have put this card in the side deck as opposed to being in the main deck. You could maybe tech one copy of this in the main deck for now, just to test it out, but I think that this card is going to be more of a side deck option just because you want to like there'll be a lot of decks that won't be trying to triple strike or quadruple strike you down from 3 or 4 life. Like there will definitely be decks that just double strike or single strike you to death, and if you're taking those, if you're going down to 2 or 1 life, this card is going to become kind of useless. So you kind of have to be careful around that. But if you're playing against, again, decks like blue decks that run the 5-drop Baby Golden Avenger and try and triple strike you down once you've used a negate, you can use this against them. Or if you're playing against decks that stall until turn 5 and drop Syn Xeno, you can use that against them. It's nice to have, but it's probably not going to be that amazing, and you're probably not going to main deck that many copies of it. I'd say 1, I think even 2 copies is too many for this card in the main deck. So I'd say maybe 1 in the main deck if you really want to run this card, but I think the side deck might be where this card comes in clutch, similar to Brainwash No More in a lot of black decks. You just want a couple of, and the fact that this card is searchable makes it obviously better than Brainwash No More, because it means you can run a lower ratio of copies of this card in your deck and still consistently see it. So that's why I'd recommend only running 1 copy in the main deck if you want to run this card at all. But it's definitely good to have, obviously. And then for the last card that I'm going to be going over for today, we have Ultimate Electric Slime. This is the Raid Shenron extra card, and it's kind of underwhelming. Definitely next to all of the other cards that we saw today, it's definitely not the best one. It has an activate main / battle. You choose one of your black battle cards. It gets plus 9k power and revenge for the turn. So it's very similar to an old card called Ultimate Blow, which came around, I think, around set 8. I think a couple of people were teching it in Hatchyak or something around that time. It's definitely okay, and I don't think it's like completely unplayable. The fact that it's searchable and the fact that you can play it for free off Spirit Boost definitely gives it those positives over Ultimate Blow, where Ultimate Blow failed. But just because you've made a bad card searchable and a bad card a little bit cheaper in certain situations doesn't mean that it's not a bad card. I think that this card is still not very good, just like Ultimate Blow wasn't amazing. If you had some cards that could maybe block twice in a turn, like if you combined this with the Ice Shenron effect, where you can restand your blockers, that makes it a little bit better. But even then, I'm not so sure, because I think now you have enough removal in the deck, and you definitely have enough removal during combat, because you have Ultimate Dragon Quake, and you could potentially run the Yellow Haze Shenron still. You just have a bunch of stuff to deal with things in combat. You have all of your new negates that you've got Oceanus negate, you have blockers all day. So I don't think that you need necessarily removal during battle. And if you're already blocking with your battle cards, you don't need to remove the cards that have already attacked. Your main concern is going to be the cards that haven't attacked. So I don't really see where this card comes up a huge amount. The plus 9k is definitely nice just for keeping your blockers alive in case you want to restand them with your Ice Shenron. But again, I don't think this card makes the cut. I think a lot of the cards we saw today definitely do make the cut, but I don't think this card is one of them, I'm afraid. I don't even think this card makes it to the side deck, sadly. As much as I wanted to, because I really like Raid Shenron, I don't think this card makes it. So, onto the actual deck that I've got going on here. Let me pull up the tab real quick. There we go. Ignore the stuff at the top. I don't really know how to use Untap, so it's created some weird bot that's just copied my every move. So just try and focus on the stuff below this line here in the middle. We've obviously got the Syn Xeno leader. And these are current theory ratios that I've got going on at the moment. None of this is tested, I want to make clear. This is just my initial thoughts sort of video. I'll bring to you a more solid list later down the line once we see more of the new cards from set 15. And once I actually get some of the cards in person. But I've gone for 2 of the Ice Shenron. I think you could potentially side deck a 3rd copy, and I was trying to fit in a 3rd copy in the main deck, but I wanted to get this deck down to 50 cards, so I had to make some really quite critical cuts, which was a little bit sad. I've just gone for 2 of these, and you'll notice throughout this deck, I've 2-ofs, and I've got a lot of 2-ofs in this deck, I think, and a lot of 1-ofs and 3-ofs. There are really not many 4-ofs in the deck, and that is because the deck searches itself so easily off of all of your discard effects and off of all of your check the top card effects, all of your check top 5 card effects. You just don't really need to run a high number of any of your dragons, I don't think. So I've gone for 2 copies of the barrier blocker. I'm really looking forward to testing this guy out. I think this card is incredibly strong, and it just makes the green decks, or the green matchup, way easier, and I think you could potentially side deck a 3rd copy for green decks. I've gone for 2 of the Oceanus Ice Shenron that's very similar to the old Oceanus, the combo guy. He's nice to have. I think that running a low ratio of him is good as well, just because in a pinch you can restand a blocker and then maybe save yourself an extra turn. He's just good to have, I think. I think 2-of is fine for him. Just like with the old Syn Xeno deck, you never ran 4 of the old Oceanus. You only ever ran like 2 or 3 copies maybe. And I think 2 is fine just for how much you search through the deck. I've actually gone down to 3 of the Haze Shenron, and my reasoning for this is we have so many new 3-drops that we can play off of our 1-drop Haze that we really don't need 4 of this guy anymore. I think he's arguably still the best 3-drop to play, which is why I've got him at 3 copies rather than 2. But the fact that we now have the Ice Shenron, which we want to be playing against green, we have our Naturon Shenron, which we want to be playing against blue. We have our Nueva Shenron, which is a critical, which can recycle the Unison. And then we have a couple of other options, which I also haven't included in here. I don't think you need to run 4 copies of this guy anymore. You used to definitely need 4 copies of him because you only had him to bring out of your Haze, and you only had the Naturon as well. And then Naturon is really not that good. So I've gone just down to 3 copies of him. I could maybe see myself cutting him down to 2 copies in the future, but he's just such a strong card that I want to test him at 3 first. 4 copies of the 1-drop Haze is going to be pretty standard for this deck in my opinion. This card is the backbone of the deck, and it's going to carry the deck really hard because it's how you make all of your 3-drops so much cheaper. Then we have 2 of the Nueva Shenron. I'm just testing this guy at 2 to recycle the Unison. I could maybe see myself cutting this guy down to 1. I don't know if I'd cut him entirely from the deck. I'll have to see. But he's definitely one of the weaker cards in the deck in my opinion. I don't think that you need to recycle your Unison all that much, because I think once you get a Unison established, it generally sticks around for most of the game. So I'm not too certain on this card so far, and I definitely could see myself cutting it down to a lower number of copies. I've gone for 4 of the Searcher Nueva Shenron. I've been considering cutting this deck guy down to 3, just because the entire deck searches itself already, because of all of the discard effects and all of your check top card effects that you have. So I could definitely see myself cutting this guy down to 3. The reason that I've kept him at 4 for now is because I've actually cut Ultimate Whirlwind Spin entirely from the deck, and I've moved it into the sideboard, because this is just a better Ultimate Whirlwind Spin. because it costs 0 energy rather than the 1 energy or the spirit boost that you have to pay for the ultimate whirlwind spin. The only advantage that ultimate whirlwind spin has over this card is the fact that you can use it as a pseudo senzu bean for the turn, but that's the reason that I've moved it to the side deck, is because I think ultimate whirlwind spin is going to come into the main deck for those aggressive matchups, but you want to keep it in the side deck in the slower matchups because it kind of becomes more of a dead card in those matchups. So this card is just kind of a better ultimate whirlwind spin, and it also has the flexibility of you could play it as a 20k critical if you needed to, but you can also actually discard it off of some of your effects and you'll still get to search your top card of your deck. So this card is just a more flexible ultimate whirlwind spin in my eyes, and that's why I've got it at 4 copies and I've cut ultimate whirlwind spin entirely into the side deck. Continuing on with our 3 drops, we have one of the Naturon Shenron and one of the Syn Xeno. The Syn Xeno I was always finding to be really clunky. You generally only ever dropped this guy once or twice in a game anyway, so I think dropping him down to 1 or 2 copies is fine. Maybe with the fact that you have a triple striker now and you're actually able to apply pressure that is meaningful in the deck will mean that I bump this guy up to 2 or 3 copies again. But for now I'm just testing him down at 1. I could definitely see myself in the future cutting this Nueva Shenron and maybe sticking in a few more copies of the Syn Xeno, but we'll have to see how that plays out, obviously. I've also gone for one Naturon Shenron. This is entirely just for the blue matchups, because blue is obviously extremely prevalent in the meta right now. The reason that I went with one Naturon Shenron is because it's probably one of the worst 3 drops that the deck has. And so I didn't want to run it at 2, because in those matchups that aren't blue, where the deflect keyword skill isn't important, the card just kind of sucks. But the reason that I've still got it in here is because you can obviously declare your 1-drop Haze Shenron effect, and then they have to respond with Trunks in counter window 1, and then when they do that you can bring out the Naturon Shenron and still get your effects and still get your body on board. So that's the reason I've got him in here, but I haven't got him in here at 2 because he's just a bad card in other matchups. And the reason that I've gone for 2 Ice Shenrons, which is good against green, and 1 Naturon Shenron, which is good against blue, is because your matchup against blue is already extremely good, because it's generally going to be a slower control game, which means you're able to mill them out a lot easier. Whereas against green, they're ripping your hand apart, they're counterplaying some of your guys with the freezer counterplay, so you're going to struggle a lot against green compared to blue. And so I included more cards in the deck to try and deal with the green matchup, because you want to have all of your matchups theoretically at around a 50% win rate. So I've included more cards to help you with the green matchup, because you want to have more ways to deal with your harder matchups rather than just hard winning in your easy matchups. So that's why I've gone for 2 Ice Shenron and 1 Naturon Shenron, and also because Ice Shenron is better in the matchups that he's worse in. So for example, against non-green decks, this card is going to be better than Naturon is against non-blue decks. I've gone for 3 of the Darkness Absorbed Omega Shenron. That's just because he's really nice removal. The reason I haven't got him at 4, well, there's 2 reasons really. One is that he's got unique, and he's going to be sticking around on the board for a while most of the time. And the second reason is because your deck is again going to be, you're going to be able to dig through your deck really quickly. You're going to be discarding the Shadow Dragons you don't need to search the Shadow Dragons you do need every single matchup. And so this guy is really easily obtained through your deck. And so you probably don't need to run 4 copies of him. You could maybe put him up to 4 copies, but I think that could get a little bit too clunky for the deck. So for now I've just got him at 3. And like I mentioned earlier, sacking off guys from your board is going to be a lot trickier in this deck than it was in the yellow Syn Xeno deck, because this deck doesn't put out as big boards as the yellow one did. Then we have 2 of the Triple Strike Omega Shenron. I think that 2 of this is the correct number, just the same as the yellow Syn Xeno deck. You just want to make sure that you have 1 spare in case one of them gets milled or something. And this deck is going to be able to easily search them out. I'm still rocking with the Syn Xeno Secret Rare. I actually own a copy of this card now, which I'm really excited about. So I'm going to be able to play the deck properly now. He's just amazing. He works super well in the deck. I'm really happy with him. I wouldn't change him out for any other secret rare. We've got our 4 Oceanus super combos, sticking with this because they're searchable. We've gone with 1 Raid Shenron negate. This is just because I would like to run this at 2 or 3 copies, but the fact that you need 7 dragons in the drop area to make him a 1-drop makes him a little bit more inconsistent than I would have liked, because he's generally only going to be live by around turn 3 in most matchups. I could maybe put him up to 2. I could definitely see myself putting him up to 2. I think 3 copies might be a bit too many, but this is kind of my way of, this is my replacement for Power Burst, basically, because in the older lists I was running Power Bursts, and I was running Brainwash No Mores, whereas in this list I think Raid Shenron is just better because it's searchable. I'm still going with 4 Oceanus negates. I honestly could see myself cutting this guy down to 3 now that we have our Ultimate Ice Ray, and we have a lot more negates in the deck. But I think that 4 is still fine. Like, it's just a really good card. I've gone with 3 of the Ultimate Minus Energy Ball. The only 2 extra cards that I'm running 3 copies of are this guy and the Negative Energy Explosion. And my reasoning behind that is because this card is insanely strong. And you need more low to the ground removal, you need more hard removal for smaller battle cards, and the Negative Energy Explosion is going to be a more consistent way to see your Unison turn 1. So that's my reasoning behind that, and the Negative Energy Explosion also searches out all of your extra cards, so it's better to have that at 3 copies rather than running more copies of the extra cards you want, because you're able to just search your extra cards with the extra copies of these. And it's more flexible that way. And then for the 2 of extra cards, I've got 2 Ultimate Ice Rays, just because we already have 4 Oceanus negates, so we don't want to be running too many Floodgates. And I think Oceanus is probably better, just for the simple fact that, again, it's a battle card, so you can, in a pinch, you can discard it and still get the top card search. Obviously, this card is going to be better in certain matchups, and I could maybe see myself side decking a 3rd copy if you're against a really low to the ground swarm deck, but I think 2 copies of this card is going to be fine along with your 4 Oceanuses. I've got 2 Ultimate Dragon Quake. This card is still really nice to have, just as a nice combat trick in case your opponent goes in with something big. And this is another reason why I think that the Nueva Shenron extra card isn't necessary in the main deck, is because if your opponent is swinging with like a triple strike or a quadruple strike or something like that, most of the time it's going to be a really big energy cost, and you're able to just blink it out for the battle or send it to the drop area at the end of the turn with this card. So I think that you can just run this card and have it be a more flexible version of the Nueva Shenron extra card. And then I'm still running the Ultimate Dark Dragon Flying Bullet, but I've cut it down to 2 copies just for a bit of space, and because I think if this deck sees any sort of play in the meta or at a rogue tier or anything like that, people will immediately learn how to play around this card. The main advantage of this card is that people don't play around it, but as soon as people start playing around it, it's going to become a lot worse, and I could honestly see myself cutting this card completely, just because some of the other extra cards might be better, and I could maybe take this card out and put in the Ultimate Whirlwind Spin. But I'm running 2 copies for now just because people aren't playing around it at the moment, but as soon as they start playing around it, it just becomes pretty useless, to be honest. And then for the last card, I'm still running 4 of the Toa. I did mention earlier I could see myself putting in 3 copies instead. The main reason being that you already have a bunch of ways to search it. You have your Negative Energy Explosion, and you have your Recycle Nueva. If I were to cut this guy down to 3 copies, I'd probably want to put Negative Energy Explosion to 4 copies so that I can more consistently see the Toa turn 1 still. And the Toa is actually the only card in this deck that isn't searchable off of your top card dragon effects, because it's the only card that isn't a Black Shadow Dragon, which is really annoying, which is why you would probably want to run 4 copies of the Negative Energy Explosion in a build where you'd run 3 copies of the Toa, because the Toa is obviously not searchable, whereas the Negative Energy Explosion is, so you're giving yourself just that 1 extra card that can be searched, and you're effectively still running the same number of copies of the Toa. unless you obviously whiff off of the negative energy explosions, which does happen pretty consistently because it's only a top 7 search. But yeah, that's basically my initial thoughts about the new Syn Xeno support at the moment. I'm going to get into testing as soon as I can, and hopefully bring you guys some more updated content on this deck. But I'm really excited to see where the deck can go. I think that it's going to be really strong going into next format. I think that it can definitely compete now at the top levels, and I'm just really excited to see what happens with it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. If you have any different opinions to me, or if you have the same opinions to me, let me know down below what you think of the new cards. And let me know if you want to see more videos like this from me, like discussion style videos rather than just deck profiles and gameplay, because I would like to bring a variety of content to you guys depending on what you guys are after. So as always, thank you very much for watching. This is probably going to be a bit of a longer video, but I hope you enjoyed anyway. Like and subscribe and comment, all of that stuff as always. Check out the links in the description if you want to stay updated with the Facebook page or with the Discord. You can check all of that out, and I hope you have a good one. See you in the next video.